and some of the side effects that may be caused by the coronavirus vaccine. You're not allowed to mention them for some reason. Real. One woman says her husband and her son nearly died and were gravely injured after taking the vaccine, a vaccine, in at least her son's case, he did not need. She joins us next to explain what happened. For the last 2 nights, we've reported on the destruction of one of the prettiest neighborhoods in America, Buckhead in Atlanta. We hope that the city's mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, would notice that her city is falling apart, that people are being murdered, and then do something about it. Instead, Keisha Lance Bottoms is focused on access to gender-neutral bathrooms. That's her big achievement. She just signed an administrative order, designated more than 100 city-owned restrooms as, quote, all gender. So you can still get shot while you're out jogging in Buckhead, but at least you can use the ladies' room, if you like. So there is enormous social pressure, and in fact institutional pressure from the corporate media, not to mention any potential downsides of vaccines. And while most people agree, this show certainly does, that vaccines are a good thing, nothing is all good. Nothing in this temporal world comes without a downside, and anyone who claims otherwise is a liar, period. That's always true. Sometimes the trade-off is worth it, but there's always a downside. So we feel honor-bound to tell you what it is, because it's your choice whether to take it or not, period. So way back in January, just when the vaccines had come out, a physician called Gregory Michael died of a brain hemorrhage 16 days after taking Pfizer's COVID vaccine. Since then, health officials have been probing a link between the vaccine and blood clotting. And in fact, the Biden administration's own numbers suggest that more than 5,000 people have died from taking the vaccine. You can argue about whether or not that's true, but you can't argue it's not worth following up on. And it hasn't been by anybody. Meanwhile, the AstraZeneca vaccine has not been administered in many countries, including here in the U.S., in part because scientists believe it can cause fatal bleeding. So the question is, how widespread are these problems? No one is reporting on this. Again, we're not saying vaccines are bad. We believe vaccines are good, and some people should take vaccines. But we believe in telling the truth, period. Sherry Romney has firsthand evidence of the harm that they can do. She says members of her family experienced blood clotting after taking the COVID vaccine, and we're happy to be joined by her tonight. Ms. Romney, thanks so much for coming on tonight. Now, I know from reading your pre-interview that you're in favor of vaccines, you've taken vaccines, you've obviously encouraged your family to take. So it's not a question of whether vaccines are good or bad. It's a question because most people, including me, think they're good. But in the case of this vaccine, what do you believe the effect on your husband and your son has been?
Well, there's no other explanation for what happened to my son and my husband. So we are pretty certain that it was a direct result of the vaccine. My son and my husband formed blood clots. My son formed blood clots, 3 blood clots, 2 in his brain, and my husband formed over 100 in his lungs.
Oh. Now, first of all, I'm sorry. That's awful, and it's devastating, and of course it's life-threatening. But tell us the circumstances under which they took the vaccines in the first place. How old is your son? Was he at risk? Did he have pre-existing health problems?
No, my son is 17 years old. He was an athlete. He was an elite athlete. He was a varsity basketball player on his basketball team. We went in to get the vaccines, my husband, myself, and I, because he travels a lot and because there's a lot of talk about these vaccine cards, things like that. So we felt a lot of pressure to go get the vaccines. So we thought, let's hurry and go get that done before the summer season of basketball starts. He's not in any risk category whatsoever.
So
well, on the 21st...
I'm sorry, just to be clear, you were pressured into getting the vaccines.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. It wasn't something we were worried about. I didn't think that there was a chance that my son or my husband or myself really were going to experience some significant side effects from COVID itself, especially my son and my husband, because they are really healthy. And my son, being an athlete and only 17 years old, wasn't in a high-risk category. But we did feel pressured to administer the vaccine to them because of that travel, because of those tournaments, because of the talk in these different states about needing to have vaccines or you can't participate in some of these things. So we did feel that pressure. So on the 21st of April, we went in, and the 3 of us got our COVID vaccine, our first COVID vaccine. I want to make that really clear. It was the first COVID vaccine. That very night, my son began to complain of swelling in his neck. The swelling continued to develop, and by the 5th day, the morning of the 5th day, he could not move his head or his neck without assistance from his hands. Took him into the pediatrician. The pediatrician said it has nothing to do with the shot. Really doesn't. Think it's a pulled neck muscle. 8 days later, my son was in the pediatric ICU with 3 blood clots, 2 in his brain and 1 in his neck. And the very weekend after he was released from the hospital, my husband was admitted to the hospital with over 100 blood clots in his lungs.
I'm really sorry, and I hope they recover. I know that they're still in trouble, and I can't overstate, Americans should never be forced to take medicine they don't want or need, period, under any circumstances.
And if I can say that my son, it actually turns out that my son, we found out on the 8th day that he was in the hospital, my son had nucleocapsid antibodies. So he had had a recent infection, unbeknownst to myself, my husband, or my son, and he had recovered from COVID. He had natural antibodies. So we gave him a vaccine that was not medically necessary and put him in harm's way. A simple blood test would have shown that he didn't need that vaccine.
So many American families are going through this right now. Colleges are forcing this on kids who've been infected and recovered. It's a scandal. And I appreciate your coming on tonight. Sherry, thank you so much, and Godspeed to your family.
Thank you.